Hi everybody, it's Mark Shelsh here. This is the Mark Art Show coming to you from Galeria de las Islas in Metro Manila, Philippines. And I'm standing in front of some of Austin's paintings that we've just hung. I love these paintings. I'll get out of the way. You can have a look at them. They are really different, really edgy, really on the edge of everything as paintings go. Now, for some of you looking at them, you won't like them because of how you've been trained and the way that you think. Because I was talking about it yesterday in my blog. I talked about buyer's prejudice, and I talked about how I went shopping for this refrigerator with a friend, and he eventually bought the refrigerator that his mother would have bought. And the reason why is because the thief inside told him that if he bought the one that his mother would buy, it's safe. You see, because if that's the one mother would buy, if it all goes wrong, I can blame her, which is wonderful. So I set myself free. The thief is really happy. Now we're safe, it's quiet, we're back to mediocrity. Whereas I would have bought the one that was, I thought, greater value. Now this comes over into art. People have prejudices about art. A lot of people do not like these paintings, and when you ask them why not, they really don't have a valid reason. It's like when people say, well, I don't like abstract art. Why don't you like abstract art? Well, because I know what I like. Okay, that's a strange kind of response, but I get that all the time. Now, the only way to change buyer prejudice is by education. And education is very difficult when someone already believes that they're right. So it takes time and it takes an influencer. Now remember, buyer's prejudice comes from parents, siblings, environment we live in, the friends we have, even the culture we have. There's a prejudice in all of it. So we must understand that. And when we understand that, then we can open ourselves up to growth, to take on new experiences, to learn new things, to grow as a person. Okay? Now, the art world. Collectors often start out with a very strong prejudice. A very strong buyer's prejudice, and you as artists need to understand that, just like we as artists have prejudices as well. Okay? Now, I dealt with one person who was a good collector, a reasonably big collector, when I was running a gallery in Australia, and she was only bought traditional art. And she said to me straight to my face, I think I've told this story once before, that she didn't like my art. She didn't like modern art, she didn't like abstract art, she liked traditional art because this is what she liked. Okay, fair enough. Now, without going into a long story, after a little bit more influence with modern and contemporary and abstract art, I remember she eventually bought a lot of my modern abstract work that she wouldn't have bought before. Why? Because it was a slow education process, and she turned it around. So finally she got to the point where she said to me one day, you know, I really got to get rid of all this traditional art. It's not what I want in my collection anymore. Now that's what happens with buyers. We're a collector, sorry. We see it often with collectors. When a collector will start out collecting, quite often they'll start out collecting very, very traditional work. But as they get influenced within the art world and they see what other people buy and they see work like this, all of a sudden they begin to be educated and begin to look away from traditional and say, hey, I like this. It's kind of edgy. I kind of like it. It's kind of fun and I want to have it. Now artists, you and I are the same. I remember with my art education, because of my family and my grandparents being in the arts, I grew up with a big love for impressionistic paintings. Now, impressionistic paintings are fairly traditional, really, in basis. It's just the light brushstrokes, but they're fairly traditional. So I had a kind of a prejudice against abstract work as a young man. And I remember my great aunt Maud, a spinster aunt, we all had one. She was a music teacher. When I was working in Brisbane City as a young man, calling me and asking me to come to the town hall with her to go and look at Jackson Pollock's Blue Poles. Now, I had seen Blue Poles and I'd heard all the comments about it, the negative things. It was rubbish, it was a drunken man's work, it was all these things. I heard all those things. And I went there with Maud with a prejudice not to like it. And when I got there and she's standing there, now this lady by this time was in her must have been late 80s. And she's standing there with her little hat on, this little tiny dumpy lady with the long frock on, you know, and the heavy stockings and the heavy shoes. You remember of the kind of look of the late 60s. She was still wearing it in the 80s and in the 70s, sorry, this would have been the late 70s. And I remember her standing there, this incredibly conservative woman, looking at this painting, and she turned to me and she said, "This is one of the greatest paintings I've ever seen in my life." I was shocked. I just stood there dumbfounded. I didn't like it. And then she started to explain it to me, and my education started. And by the time I walked out of that, I too was in love with Jackson Pollock. And then that introduced me to Ian Fairweather, and I began to fall in love with very, very contemporary art. I didn't do it myself. I only started painting in what you would call abstract contemporary work late in the 80s. I always did my squiggles, but I kind of didn't see them as real art. It was only in the late 80s that they became part of the genre which I called art. Now this has happened to a lot of artist friends, even Jackson Pollock himself. Jackson Pollock was taught as a landscape painter with his brother, and his brother went on to spend his life painting landscapes and not actually having any effect on the art world. And Jackson, because he began to get educated and influenced by modernism, became one of the greatest painters of the 20th century. Without Jackson Pollock, work wouldn't have changed. Nobody, you know, you look at it today and say, well, it's just paint spots. Yeah, but nobody had done that before. And that's what makes it so incredible. And that's what makes it so wonderful. Same with Ashil Gorky. Ashil Gorky was an immigrant from Armenia who went into the United States pre-war, and he was really kind of a naive painter, very folk art in style. And yet by the time of his death, he was an abstract painter who did marvelous, glowing, transparent works that today are only seen in museums. These men were influenced. Their prejudice was overtaken by education and influence. Now, you and I, you might be a traditional painter, and that's fine, and I'm not trying to get you to change, but what I am trying to get you to do is open your mind up to accept that if you do beautiful landscape paintings with 2 trees and a cow and a little farmhouse, and that is art to you, I want you to open up your mind, artist, to look at this and understand that this is art as well. You see, art is such a big genre. Is this good art? I'm not saying that. Is it bad art? I'm not saying that. Is your art good art or is your art bad art? It's irrelevant. The fact of the matter is, it's the art we like and the art we don't like. So, education is so important. If you want to change your prejudice in the art world, educate yourself. That's why I say read books, look at things, understand it, get an understanding of what else is going on. Now, let's talk about you selling to the buyer who's got a prejudice. Look, it's really hard to sell to somebody abstract work when they really come out and say they don't like it. The best thing is just to let it go. Don't argue, don't criticize, let them just walk off with a smile. But you will get those ones who will want to talk to you about different work, and that is your opportunity to educate them towards your art and influence them with your art. Not only do we sell artists, but we too must influence people. We must educate people to love art in all the different genres. If you're a landscape painter, that's good and that's right. And if you're an extreme abstractionist painter, that's good, that's right. It's all part of this wonderful art world that you and I are part of, and everybody's got to be able to live in it. And one of the real services that you and I do, artists, when we deal with customers, is educate them about art. If you'd shown me this art when I was 20 years old, I would have told you it was terrible. You show it to me now at my age, and I think it's wonderful. I'm rapturous with it. Now, why? Because I've learned that art is bigger than anything. Art is bigger than me, bigger than my likes, and bigger than my prejudices. and same with you. So what I say to you, artists, when the buyer comes to you and they are negative about your art and critical about your art, and you see no way of excuse me, influencing them, smile them off. But if they come up to you and they're nice and they say honestly to you, you know, I don't really like this, I don't understand this. Wow, what an opportunity to influence them and educate them. And who knows, in a month, 2 months, three months, a year, they may come back and buy one because you took the time to educate them. You and I, artists, not only have to sell art, not only have to produce art, but we need to educate the buyer and influence the buyer to buy our work. Okay, I hope that helps. Look, this buyer prejudice is a big thing and it's not talked about. Well, I don't think anyone's ever talked to me about it in the art world. And I'm trying to give it to you to make you think a little bit more and kind of understand the people you're dealing with. Understand when these people walk up to you, they have certain prejudices. We'll talk more about it, okay? You guys have a great day. It's a wet and rainy day in Manila today. So I don't know, maybe there's a typhoon coming. Who knows? You have a fabulous day, and I look forward to the day when you come and visit me here in Metro Manila and we talk about art. Remember to reach out, touch people, hugs and smiles are free, give them away generously. And guys, I'm going to talk to you tomorrow. Ciao!